I missed my quick skimming reading comprehension test. The one issue that I've been really upset about the rules, not the organization, which is the big one, but that Barbarossa restriction. Apparently whatever note I've got written in there, Spring 44 or something like that, over here, instead of 41 for the penalty for the Russians if they launch an attack early. Well, that's in the errata. The errata is not terribly well organized because you can't index into a rule book like this well. It's kind of a mess. So, you know, it wasn't like I could just read through and see, oh, case 7.31 gets changed here. There are no case numbers in here. There's no way to reference into this rule book. And unfortunately, I'm sure that, like I said, I'm sure the metagaming rule book was pretty lousy too. I can't imagine it being done well. I've heard people saying, hey, the Avalon Hill rule book's better, but Avalon Hill is just so bad at doing rules. Not across the board. Not across the board, but they could never settle down on what their format was. Some games, Republic of Rome, Geronimo, perfectly good games, no errata really for them of any significance. But man, you couldn't read these rules. You know, you couldn't understand what the hell the game was about by trying to read them. They weren't that complicated a game, but just terrible. And then something like this is just, you know, it's got its issues in it, but it also is organized so badly because of the programmed instruction. But there were other games that I think they did a pretty solid job. Oh, man. When I'm talking about Avalon Hill rules, I just cannot help but look to their grandest of all failures as far as I'm concerned. I'm looking for it here. I've got it somewhere. There it is. Struggle of Nations. Oh man, that game just has so many problems, and it's such a pity because like this, it's a really intriguing design. It's the Zucker game put on these tiny little hexes with elongated pieces. Really, really looks like perhaps it would have been the best of the Zucker designs, at least of the early ones. I haven't looked into his later ones. 1809 is probably the most recent that I've played. I have some of his later ones. I just haven't gotten around to them yet because, well, they never excite me as much as I hope they do. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going right now, but yeah, I mean, there's just no similarity in the layout of the rules. Some of them have case numbers, some don't. Some of them use programmed instructions. Some of them use this fold out all on one sheet of paper. Some of the earlier stuff. They just could never settle down to one format of organizing. And it almost seems like the longer and more experience that Don Greenwood got at the head of that organization's editing and development side, the worse their rules ended up getting. With some exceptions. Some of the early stuff is definitely not very good either. So for example, I think Panzer Leader is better than Panzer Blitz in rules organization. But it's just such a crapshoot with them. All right, let's continue playing, I guess. Trying to make my decisions of what I want to do with the Germans. And this is the hardest part of the game, is because the Germans do determine the play of the game almost completely in the early stages. You know, I want to get my 6 hexes so I get my morale point, because I'm going to need that in the long run. But I also want to look at, well, what other things can I do? What happens if I attack the Soviets early? I've got a long time for that, right? Before the restriction has been lifted. What is the restriction? Spring 42 is you know, my time limit. If I hit Spring 42, the Soviets can start building their own stuff. And I may want to plow into them kind of hard a little before that, but there's almost a reason in this design, for some reason, to aim for a summer move on the Barbarossa attacks. Having the same kind of trouble with the Panzer Army Africa. It's so easy in this game because you just get to reorganize all your strength points for the most part that I just pulled all my infantry out. I put a couple armor in there on intentionally, and then I just pulled all my infantry out to use it on other attacks. Very difficult for me to remember not to be able to do that. In most cases, you can do that. The only real exception is here in North Africa, the Axis can only ship a couple of points and the Allies can ship a couple, but they can ship another one in through the Red Sea. The Allies have unlimited transport in the Atlantic, though, which is pretty potent. I think the Baltic, the Axis only have one strength point. So that becomes kind of a problem. If I can take Gibraltar, Malta falls automatically because the Allies no longer have supplies in the Mediterranean. One thing to notice, North Africa is neutral now. French Africa and Lebanon, Syria, French West Africa, are both converted to Allied territories, though. Very little happens in this game on the board, really at any stage, that I feel like I can still kind of zoom in on the combats to show them, as well as other interesting incarnations. Anyway, I've got the Panzer Army Africa here. Between it and this Western Army, I've got enough forces in Italy that I'm okay for the garrison requirements there. 3 and 2, 3 and 1. If I do end up advancing with Panzer Army Africa, I may have to build some additional Italian units. Probably put them, well, I can put them wherever. It really doesn't make much difference. I've got the Southern Army here planning on going into Yugoslavia. I got to take 3 hexes here because I'm planning on taking Denmark. Denmark's worth 3 hexes as well if I take the capital. I'll declare my attacks at this point, swinging into here, these 2 into there, this into here, and I put the strength points down. There's only 2 points in each of these countries. I'd like to stop them here, or would I rather do it here? Well, this may be a safer hex. Protecting the border seems kind of clever, but I don't think, I mean, I'm not going to hold out with Yugoslavia no matter what. But I think trying to keep away from this Western Army's attack ability is of some use. So, we'll start off. Panzer Army Africa is attacking. The 8th Army is going to take its shot. It doesn't have much on it. It's got 2 points. Panzer Army Africa has no air power. We get a 1, we get a hit. We kill one of its strength points. And now it gets to swing back. It's only got 4 strength points, but with a -1 due to Rommel. I do 2 hits. I can't affect the Air Force with that. But if I capture this hex and it has no defense anymore, then I wipe that Air Force out by overrunning it. So I've got 2 strength points of armor going against a 0. It's a 1 through 4. I need a 1 through 5 because of Rommel. He succeeds. That's been a successful attack there. And the 8th Army is wiped. Let's go for our other attacks. I've got troops in the OKW. They're not doing anything. I'm just gathering armor there to count towards that 6 or so points that I want to keep there continuously, just to keep the Russians in check. Up here in the north, I've got 12 strength points. Well, they get a first fire at 2, and they do a hit to me. That's got a possibility of knocking out my commander. That would have been a nice attack roll. And now I've got 11 strength points firing. First die roll, I kill. That's good enough. And now I've got 4 to try to advance. I check. No leader. Four going into a 0 is 1 to 6. That's going to succeed. Could I keep going across these crossing arrows? No, because I'd need to use an amphibious assault to attack across crossing arrows. So no way I'm going to take Norway easily. And there's no capital, so I'd have to capture it hex by hex. Denmark falls. And I'm going to get those 3 hexes. So now I only need 3 hexes down here. Well, I'm going to open up with the Western Army's attack first. It's only got 4 strength points. But it clears the hex. That doesn't eliminate the factory though. Now I get to keep going with the Western Army. Do I want to try to advance with 1 armor into here? I can probably get back into Italy if that's not mountainous. So why not? On a 1 to 4 I get in there. And I do. It's not really what I'm planning on doing. But I pushed that in. Now the Southern Army, with its big 7 armor, is going to be able to get in automatically, but I do get to reveal it doesn't have a leader. Okay. Now I get to continue. Panzer Army Africa is going to go after this hex. It's got a 1 point. I can't do any firepower, but I do have 2 armor going into, on a 1 or a 2. -1 because or +1 because I've already moved a hex, but -1 on a 1 or 2 I take Suez and Alexandria. I don't get in there, so that's done. The Northern Army, you know, here's what would be useful to me is getting back to the OKW space. So I'm going to try to do that. I'm going to advance into friendly territory with 7 armor. No, sorry, 4 armor. It's a 1 to 7, drop it to 1 to 6. And now it's a 1 to 5 to get into the OKW space. I do so. I'm allowed to drop off units. Right now I have 9 strength points there. I'm 1 strength point over. So I'm going to try to advance an armored unit, I guess, into here. That's a 1 armor into a friendly hex. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm actually allowed to. I think I've got to try to advance with that 4 armor. 1 to 7, 1 to 6, 1 to 5, 1 to 4. I'll try to move into here. And I succeed. Now I try to go back. That's 1 to 3. And I don't. The reason I'm trying to go back is to cover Berlin with more strength. But with the Russians unable to take this big 2-point hex easily, I'm making it less attractive, so maybe I don't need all 6 strength points that I'd like to put in the OKW. And now our final attacks here, well, I'm going to continue with the Western Army with its 4 strength points. It gets shot back out with a 2, I think, just because I don't want to get it wiped out. That 2 strength point hit. The 2 fails to hit anyway. The 4 strength point gets to fire here. No, it already fired. Shit. Yeah, I don't want to move with this unit yet. Do I? I'm trying to figure out if I want to activate this unit. It doesn't matter which unit I'm activating because of that. Miss. Yeah, I don't want to advance into that hex. I've got 1 armor into a friendly hex. I'm going to try to back up instead. And I get that back here to cover my Italian garrison. I'm 1 point short, but I can build an infantry. So the Southern Army gets to shoot. It's got some 13 strength points. That's going to be 2. Well, that's this whole force, because I didn't have to shoot with that. And now it gets to advance. It's got 7 armor. Going into a 0, that's a 1 to 7. So I'll take Yugoslavia. Well, probably take Serbia there. And now I want to move more, because I need 1 more hex. I think I'll go here, because that'll cut this hex off. I don't really want to give the Allies this hex. I'm not sure why. I gotta think about this. Which way I want it to go. Yeah, I'm gonna try to cut the hex off. So What are we going into? We're going into a 1 with 7 armor. That's a 1 to 7, 1 to 6, 1 to 5. And I succeed in taking this as well. Let me put a little marker there. We'll put an allied marker there to just remind us. Do I want to keep going? It's 1 to 4 into here. Doesn't really, I don't really have any reason to attack that, to tell you the truth. Is there some reason I want to move my army somewhere else? I could be going into friendly hexes here. 1 to 9, 1 to 8, 1 to 7, 1 to 6, 1 to 5 going back up here. That's successful. This would be 1 to 4. Let's put it here. I'm in there. 1 to 3. And I'll stop there. That's got my Italian garrison covered now. Another option would have been to try to drive through Germany, but getting there seems pointless. So, I've conquered myself some more territory. I can kind of remove these, or just put this down here to indicate that I've got that. I want to keep the production visible. Now I got to make my decision on what I'm purchasing for the turn, and it's not going to be trivial to decide. You'll notice I left a couple of hexes unconquered. If there were 6 of them that I could, you know, defeat or capture this way, I could get morale points in the allied player turn as well, but that's not going to happen here. Instead, I've just gotten, I just got my 6, which gave me my morale. So my morale's up to 13. I also rebuilt a lot of production. I'm up to 33 production at this point. I built up the 4 in France, 1 in Yugoslavia, the Danish point. Basically, I'm looking at, well, that means I'm not going to make a Spring 41 invasion because I spent too much on rebuilding stuff. I'm just not going to have the army to be able to slam into Russia, I don't think. Which then, of course, means, okay, where do I go for my morale points this next turn? Do I go for Spain? That's an interesting option. Less interesting if this is still open. If I could still go in, if it looks like I'm going to have an easy route into the Red Sea, it might be worthwhile for me to try to launch up this way and prepare myself so that I could actually attack into Russia from Iran, getting lots and lots of, getting my morale points basically for the turn from those, and then I can build things up. I've also thrown some points into my technology. I'm going to get a roll on mech, and that's successful, so my mechs have gone down, I think down to 3 per, indeed, which is a good price. Do I want to go for the bombers? My bombers are at 7, which is the same as the British. I feel like if I can't get a success here, I'm probably not going to succeed very heavily in the strategic bombing campaign. Where does it go from 7? It goes down to 4. That's a worthwhile price, to tell you the truth. Do I want to wait another turn and start bombing Britain next turn? Or, you know, do I want to roll for the tech now? I'll roll for the tech. Well, I won't be able to start bombing next turn because I haven't built them. I'll roll for the tech now, see what I get. Because if I get a 1 or a 2, that may be a worthwhile action. I do not. I get a failure. And I go back 3 spaces, which means I lost all my tech advances that I spent on that. U-boats I'm going to hold off on. Oh, I forgot to roll for them. Let me just do them. That's 2 points. Yeah, they didn't do anything this turn anyway. And now we'll push into the Ruski turn and see where they're going. The Russians are focusing still on tech. Spent, you know, 7 of their, no, make it 5 of their 9 points on tech. The other 4 they spend on some more additional infantry. They've got the infantry down pretty cheap, but it can go lower. I'm going to make my rolls for infantry and mech now. Mech might not be the greatest of idea because that opens things up for the Germans, but you know what? Their mechs are cheap enough that I gotta have the ability to kind of keep up with their production costs. Once my production comes online, it'll be helpful. So quick roll for infantry. I'm at the lowest on infantry, so I get no bonus on this. However, I do get to drop it. Going from 2 down to 1. It doesn't get any cheaper than that. And that's where I need that. Of course, that helps the Germans in their defenses eventually. For mechs, again, I'm going to roll. I get the bonus here on Bs. I get that down to a 3. And that can go as low as a 2, actually, which is pretty impressive. The final question is, do I want to roll for the TAC Air? My TAC Air is at 3. Again, that could lower me down to the German TAC Air level. I'm going to go for it because I got the bonus there. And I get away with that as well, getting me down to a 2. So I'm at the point where I can start producing. The problem is, of course, you know, I can always make it lower, right? Moved my Caucasus army a little bit forward because I think I'm unlikely to get pocketed here. There's no requirement that I have to be up against the border and really get hosed the way the Russians historically did. Now on to the Western Allies, and they got some big problems ahead of them. Again, I forgot to do something in the German turn. I'm going to try to slip out with this. This moved. It's not a big deal, but I don't want to forget it. I only have a 1 in 6 chance of hitting this with the British fleet, and I do not. So it slips out into the raid box, and I'll get some additional shots to try to create a loss of production on the Brits. It's important to do this every turn, and I'm always going to forget. So I'm going to be backtracking a lot. I wouldn't do that in a opposed game, and I probably wouldn't forget as often in one. Allies, I shipped more stuff out here to Cairo or whatever. I can get 2 in through the Med still. That hasn't been closed down because of Gibraltar still being mined, and 1 in through the Red Sea. Not much can be done about this because it's not coming from the US. So, you know, I've got 3 strength points there now, but I also built up some TAC Air and some infantry, planning on sending that there. That's my main front right now. I can't really fight anywhere else. I've boosted some TAC. Air defense I could only spend 1 on since I'm the lowest on that. But some of the others, the infantry, the TAC Air, the mech, I want to get them up. I'm gonna need to get those prices lower eventually. I am not too impressed with what the Germans are doing so far with their submarines. They have a decent price, but they haven't been building them. They haven't been concentrating on me. And it's one of the problems I find with this game. It's so hard to build up the force that you need to handle the Soviet Union. And, you know, you can't go both ways. I guess that's the problem. And I always kind of do. Part of it's kind of the, hey, you boost points in different things, and you're trying to get yourself to, am I going to attack the Soviets or am I going to focus on Great Britain? You can't take Hitler's attempt. Let's try on Great Britain and bomb it somehow with tactical bombers, which can't be done in this game. And then turn my emphasis over to the Soviets. You got to face one or the other, and it's a tough call. But I feel like I'm aiming more and more towards the Barbarossa scenario. The other option would be delay Barbarossa as much as you can. Maybe launch the attack in spring of 42. It doesn't make a lot of sense to follow Hitler's path. Right now, we've just gone through this winter of 40. We're in the spring of 41. This is when Germany has to really make its decision here. And it just doesn't feel like I've got my U-boats and my bombers at the level that I need to really wreak havoc on the Brits. The problem with that, of course, is If I don't hit Brits with bombers, my air defense isn't going to be sufficient to handle the U.S. coming in. I got to win a quick victory against the Russians if I go for them. I got to win a quick victory against the Brits if I go for them. I can't split and attempt to do both, and I shouldn't backtrack. I got to roll the dice on one or the other, basically. All right, given the current situation, I'm having real trouble deciding what to do with the Axis here. My first thought is, hey, let's start Barbarossa early and just slice in. Now, I don't have my minor allies. That's a disadvantage, but not a huge one. I'd be able to probably chunk myself really close to where the Russian line is right now. The problem is launching that attack. The Soviets do have a decent amount of armor. They have 6 points of armor, so they could make some advances and cause me some trouble. They're weak, though, overall. Also, when do I get... So this turn, then, the Russians would get their full production, which is kind of scary. And the next turn, they add the Siberian production into that. At which point, let's see. I don't know when Siberia goes up to 12. That's probably an event. Oh, they actually have this here. 6 is spring 42 for Soviet production. No, that's the if not at war. Siberian production goes up at 7, the winter of 42. That goes to full strength. Otherwise, let me see. Until the turn after. Yeah, it's kind of weird. They give the Siberian production, the base Siberian production, on 4? Up here, 3? No. I don't know when they get their base production for Siberia. I guess the turn after the war, after they go to full production no matter what. Another option, though, is to pursue the English, but I can't pursue them with a bombing campaign. I could pursue them by marching into Spain and trying to take Gibraltar, which isn't terribly well defended. It's not too bad, but it's only got a 2-point fortress. Spain's defense is a 6 strength points, only 2 of which can be in the capital. And there are 3 hexes, maybe 4. I'm not sure of the adjacency of these 2. I think they are, that I'd have to cover. So I'd probably have to put 2 strength points in each of these. It looks like Spain would be pretty easy to take. Then Gibraltar, the next step, and that would probably pretty much seal the fate here in Egypt. Now the question is, can I take Egypt anyway? There's only 3 strength points there. I could throw a couple more in. So I'd have a 6 strength point firepower. I could probably take Cairo, Alexandria, whatever. This hex is now German, by the way. If I move there anyhow. So I don't know how much taking Gibraltar really matters, except preventing the Allies from doing anything in the Mediterranean. It would also cause the collapse of Malta, which Gibraltar and the Suez between them would cost 2 morale. That should go in conjunction with a bombing campaign to drop British morale and try to knock them out of the war. You're left with so many options at this point. As the Germans, everybody else really has to react still at this point. And later in the game, it becomes the Western Allies largely who direct the play. The Russians, well, they're going to have this funny little dance in the Soviet Union with the Germans over that huge amount of territory, and that can get really wacky too. Remember, I do call this World War wacky for a reason. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm so torn between going into Spain this turn, which keeps Soviet production low, and maybe, you know, eventually working my way up. How are my bombers? My bombers, my U-boats. You know, if I could starving British production with the U-boats doesn't really help if I'm going to go for the morale victory. It's like, if you try to play this historically, you're so doomed because Germany goes in every direction in the historical war. And most games support that. It's not a bad choice. But this one, not so much. You really do want to focus somewhere. And I don't know where to focus. I have good enough land troops that I think I can make a huge incursion into the Soviet Union. And I'm really kind of spinning my wheels with the idea of trying to hit Spain, especially when I have a shot at getting Egypt anyway and reducing Britain's production capability. So I think I'm going to go with an early Barbarossa here. The Russian armies at the front, that's going to prevent some of the silliness. Now let's see what we can get, because our goal, we have a 6-point armor in each of these. That only has a 1 to 6 to advance on the first try. Our goal would be to try to swing down here and cut up and swing over here and cut down. That's not going to happen. So I think I'm going to aim more for meeting somewhere around here. Let's see how that works. So I'm going to launch my attacks here and here. Try to cut as many of those the Russian supply center or production centers as I can. Without the Allies, I can't launch an attack in the south out of Romania, which kind of sucks. Meanwhile, I'm going to also launch an attack here from the Panzer Army Africa. I've got some infantry based in Rome, just to, well, I didn't have anything else to do with it, honestly. I don't want to make an attack into a useless attack into somewhere. So let's go with this. But the first thing we have is our raiders and our U-boats, which I think are both at 2. So let's try a couple of die rolls at 2. The Brits don't have any ASW yet. We get a hit on British production. So that'll be a point of production that they lose on their next turn. And, well, let's start with the Panzer Army Africa against the 8th Army. The 8th Army gets to fire first. It's got a 3. No leadership there. I shifted my leaders around, so I have Rommel up in the north here, going into the Baltic states. Okay, that's a hit. That gets me down to a 5. It's going to shoot back. This is the important hex. Chance of loss of leader. Doesn't happen. Did I have a leader there? No. Yeah. Well, I don't have another leader. I see Manstein's there. Oops. Okay. So I'm on the 5 table. I roll a 5. That's 1 hit on the 8th Army. And that gets it down to only 2 strength points. And I'll try to push in 4 armor against 2 strength points as a 1 through 3 to get the hex. This hex actually never fell. I shouldn't have that. That's supplied by the English. I do not make it in, so I'm stopped there. That's a pity. El Alamein and all that. Yeah, this is Tobruk here. All right, well, let's start some of the other attacks. First of all, the South Army is running with 6. I'll flip this sucker over. No leader, obviously. We know that already. 6 armor against a 1. That means I make it in. And likewise here, I've got 6 armor against a 1. I make it in. Now that doesn't capture the Baltic states. It's not a free country anymore. It's a free country, man. So I don't have to worry about that. So now I'm going to start with the North Army. I want to see how far I can get, because that might determine what I do with the South. If I get really far, maybe I'll just have to swing up to here, and that'll be worth doing. I don't know. I don't want to push my luck too much, but this is the better unit. So now I have 6 armor against a 1 to 6, but it's neutral. There's a 1-point disadvantage for having gone 1 and a 1-point advantage for having Rommel. So I can get rid of this. Put a quick -1 marker here, and nothing happens. Now, here's the problem. Wherever I go with the Germans, I have to kind of worry a little bit. So if I go, you know, I've got some decent Russian armies still out there, although not a lot of armor, so they're not going to do too much. Now I'm going to keep pushing into here. This should be a 1 through 5 to get into, and that succeeds. And now it's a 1 through 4 into that hex. That succeeds. And I'm going to move some German control markers into place. Now I'm at 1 through 3 here. Nope. So the North Army's done. I've got to hook up with that North Army, so I want to make it here. This is the South Army. I think it's on a 1 through 5, to tell you the truth, because it went a hex. So I get into there. I got to assess these suckers, because that's 3 points of production I've just taken off the Soviets. They're still at 8, however, because they're not at full production. I don't have to really worry. The only one they've lost that counted was this one. Actually, they're going to be higher, so it doesn't really matter. But we pushed into here. We'll throw a control marker there. Now, what were we at? 1 through 5. We want to go 1 through 4 into here. Make it. 1 or 2 into here. Not quite. So there's a hole. All this territory back here is still Russian. I'll put a little German marker here to indicate that, and I haven't managed to seal off any territory. What have I gained for hexes for this turn? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I got my morale point at least. And now I go to production. One thing I probably don't want to do is open up production down here, but I may want to buy this one for the simple fact that that becomes a supply source and it becomes tougher to cut off the German line. Because I've got stuff in the front line that's not protected by an army, I don't really want to do that. I also have to worry about the OKW being built up here, so that the Russians can't just set up down here and charge right across and take Berlin. That would be the end of the game right there, and probably a Soviet win. I got to recalculate what the Soviet production is as well, because they're going to have a lot of production now, everything except Siberia right now. And next turn they get Siberia. This is the danger of starting early. All right, well, we'll do those things, and then we'll see. Indeed, I bought this production point. This is important, and in fact, I wish I had been able to stay on top of this one. I wish I hadn't kept advancing, but you know, I don't know, I got greedy wanting to cut off this territory from Russian holds, because that would kind of make Berlin pretty safe. But I needed to build some extra forces in Berlin. I also had to build, obviously, a garrison tank over in Italy. Other points that I spent were primarily on these. And let's make some rolls for tech. First, I want to do a U-boat. Why? Well, if I can reduce British production, that'll be helpful. Just, you know, even on a per-turn basis. They don't have any ASW yet, so... Yeah, I succeed, so I get the U-boats down a level. They were at 4. They go down to 2 each. That's beginning to get really tasty. Would have only been a 1 point if I got a B. All right, how about air defense? Do I want to improve that? I don't feel like I need to yet. I'm not seeing British bombers be formed, but they could be a real problem if they are. Infantry, I got a 50% chance of reducing the price of infantry because of the Russian cost. I think that's worth taking a shot at. And I succeed there. So now my infantry is down to $1. I don't think it gets any cheaper than that ever now. So that's pretty cool. Of course, that makes it easier on the Western Allies, but the Russians have $1 infantry already now. TAC Air. TAC Air I have at 2. Nobody's got less than me, so it would be kind of risky to make a roll at this point. I'm going to hold off. I had 1 extra point left over, which I threw into bombers with the thought that maybe I'll roll right now, try to get that number down. Because, although it's dangerous, because that'll just help the Allied bombing cause, right? So there's kind of you don't really want to roll for things. How about mechs? Mechs are 3. I don't really want to roll on them either. Right now, they're more expensive for everyone, so that's kind of cool. So I'd rather hold off on that, and I'm not going to roll for the bombers either, because that's kind of banking something against if the Brits put bombers in. Maybe I can use those bombers to reduce Soviet production, or at worst, I can start building them and use them against Great Britain, but I don't want to do it yet. Because right now, the air defense for Britain is not a good price at all. Eventually, it gets tremendously cheap, which is why you don't really want to go with the bomber strategy too hard with the Germans, but you got to go with it somewhat, I think, to force the Brits to build their air defense up so you get an easier shot at getting it, or something like that. I don't know. All right, now we move to Mother Russia to see what kind of surprise they have in store. One thing they can definitely do is they can cut this South Army off, and that's where this game starts getting wacky, is where one side after the other is just trying to cut off the supplies to the other side. This is kind of a nice position for the Russians because they could capture this and rebuild the supplies there, and therefore it becomes much harder to bring this guy back. Well, not really to bring him back into supply, but it becomes very hard to pull the Russians out of there, but you can cut around and do some ugly stuff to them. So overall, I don't know how worthwhile it is, but it's scary. You know, the decisions in this game are always very scary. You've got so much at risk with every choice you make. I forgot to roll for this fleet. Let's see if it's going to try to deploy again out of Bray, and it succeeds. You know, that can be eliminated at any time by the British fleet up at Scalpa Flow. There's no reason that it's at Scalpa Flow anymore particularly. I can put it just about anywhere I like. But let's look at the Russian situation. I'm looking at lots of different options here. One option, and one thing I want to do is I want to cut this, because that keeps the South Army from doing anything in the next turn. It becomes immobile and unable to do anything. The only thing, it becomes necessary to hook back up, but the Germans should be able to do that. I'd have to, you know, basically surround it with defensive structure that the Germans can't get through in order to protect that. And if I do that, I'll probably lose like Moscow and St. Petersburg, which I definitely don't want to do. So the other option there is, hey, if the German fleet's not going to be here, I'm going to launch the Russian fleet and send it out into the Baltic Sea. That'll give me, you know, some limited effect on the Germans. And the way I look at it is, if I'm the only person floating out in a sea, I got control of it. So I'm going to some extent, be preventing the Germans from being able to trace supply there unless they redeploy their fleet out to the Baltic to fight me, which they can do in their turn. And my fleet's smaller, but as long as it's an uncontested sea, as far as I'm concerned, I've taken away the German capability to move troops through it. Do I have Russian capability? Jeez, I don't know. Sure, but I have no Russian amphibs, and I'm not going to build them. This is me trying to fix the rules so that Britain's surrender could mean something, right? It's going to have these additional effects here, and I don't know how to cope with that. Okay, so now as the Russians, what if I knock this out and then march into Poland and take away some of my Polish production or something? Well, then I'm risking sort of my main force. I'm going to have 6 armor in that main force to take this, and then I have to get a couple more hexes in. That may be too risky. What may not be quite as risky is to make an attack into here and then move up here and maybe have some other Russian armies in place to try to drive the Germans off of here. That'll cause some attrition losses. Problem there? Well, clearly it leaves these spaces undefended, but I got 1 point infantry. Woo! So I think I'm going to go for something like that. Try to drive the Germans completely back and show why an early Barbarossa ain't such a good idea. Maybe it won't work. Maybe Russia will fall and the game's over, basically, in that case. This is what we're setting up for the Ruskies. We're going to make an attack here and an attack here on the North Army. We might be able to pull back. Right now in Moscow, we got all the Air Force and 10 infantry, so that's a pretty potent attack there. Let's open up with that. The North Army gets to hit first, though. It's got its own 3-point Air Force taking on the Russian 3-point Air Force. Let's see how that works. I got a -1 for Rommel here. So 2, I cause a hit. And maybe a reason that I wanted to put that over in the Caucasus Army, because it would get hit second. And now I got my 10-point attack on them, again at -1, and I get a 1. That's going to be 4 hits against. Oh, I want my leaders in the main armies. 4 hits is a 6 to this. Since I took losses, I'm only doing losses for assault. I'm not going to take a special loss roll for the air attack and another one for the infantry. I don't think that's what's intended. But the Russians lose. No one. Okay, now the Russians get their attack, though, and they get to swing in with their 2 air points against the German air points. That's not going to do much. No effect, and now they get 6 points against the Germans, and that's going to do 2 hits, which we take off Rommel's army. You know, I want to look for that British. There's like some kind of penalty or something for the Brits. Okay, no loss for the Germans there. I'll try to find that. Moscow's not going to be able to advance, though. It's only got infantry, and the Hexa chose to attack, well, isn't empty. So they're done, but the Caucasus gets to go. The Caucasus army has 6, and no one. No Zhukov yet, he's all they have. 6 armor against this Hex. It's going to be a 1 to 6. So I take this Hex back, and I move in. Now I'm moving into friendly terrain, which is 1 to 9, make that 8, 7, and now I get to attack again here. Now I've so far used 1, 2, 3 movement. The Caucasus gets to attack. Rommel doesn't get a counterattack on this. I've got 10 strength points there. Yeah. That's only 2 hits on Rommel's force. More infantry goes down. Rommel does not die, and now my armor, 6 points, sorry, 6 points, look for any 6 I can find. 6 points of armor against a 6-point force isn't going to be able to take the Hex no matter what. I can't shift down or anything like that. Not that I have leaders, I'd be actually shifting in the other direction. So I'm stopped. I did not make my ground, and now I got to build an army. And I've got some forces in Leningrad, but basically I'm going to have to cover both these Hexes. With a lot of units here, these guys ain't going to be cut off from supply unless those units get wiped out. We'll see. But I have the worry of Leningrad falling. I only have 13 production this turn. Next turn I'm going to have 21, if I waited. But this looked like an impressive turn to attack just because I could cut this army out. The Germans are only going to have the OKW, which has 4 armor, Rommel's 6 armor, and then whatever's present in the west I can shift over, which is some infantry and some armor that I can throw into the fight. I can always rebuild those forces that I need to garrison Italy. Taking Axis and Allies type strategy, I built tons and tons of infantry, 13 points of infantry here, Moscow, Leningrad. I've rearranged the names of some of the army groups just to make myself happy. You're not supposed to do that, but who cares? So I've got them under names that I prefer for the position that they're in. The Caucasus was up here, right? And I didn't like that. All right. One thing that I haven't done, and I usually like to do with the Russians, is if I have time, I like to build a fortress in Leningrad, just because, well, there should be one there, right? It just helps. But anyway, that's That's not there. What about the Black Sea? Soviets have a little bit of transport capability back down there as well, which could be of some interest for possibilities. But yeah, you know, I was unable to do what I usually can do with the Soviets, which is start stockpiling some armor early in the invasion. But the invasion started early, right? Given the way I'm looking at the naval modifications that I'm kind of starting to formulate in my head, moving the British fleet down to Gibraltar doesn't hurt my chances of intercepting a German fleet breakout. I still have the capability to deal with any kind of amphibious landing, so there's no real harm to that, and it protects the concept that I have of, yeah, the Brits can still navigate through the Mediterranean. It's not really realistic, but the Brits did maintain a fleet presence in the Mediterranean, and I'd like to keep my fleet together because it's more powerful that way. Of course, I could split it. The Italian fleet is only 3 strength points, the German fleet's only 2, but I feel like this is a reasonable solution that prevents either side from really dominating the naval aspect. Now, what could happen is the Brits could sail their fleet in for a major engagement in the Mediterranean. How do I avoid that crap? I'm not sure, because they shouldn't be able to shut down necessarily the German or the Axis transfer through the Mediterranean. Although there wasn't a major engagement, the possibility of it is not really... So the game does not adequately handle that. So hiding in port is sufficient in this, and you know, it doesn't handle air issues, etc. So I don't know if I can really trust the way I'm doing things. You know, what would happen if, say, I left, I don't know, 3 capital ships and an aircraft carrier up at Scapa and sent the rest to challenge the Italian fleet? Would it drive it in? Then what happens? Do I lose supply down to Italy? Yeah, that's not really fair either. So I just don't know how to handle it. But right now I'm just placing this here saying, hey, that's enough to maintain it. And certainly if this Italian fleet is out at sea, it is in danger. And that's not what the game's meant to represent. So maybe I can't tweak the naval rules with any easy method. It's a pity because they don't really make sense to me the way they're written, but we'll play them more or less as they're written, I guess. Okay, so for the English, they shifted some troops as well down to the 8th Army, and I'm actually going to launch an attack, even though I don't have any kind of overwhelming odds or anything, for the simple fact that I can cause more valuable attrition now that the armor's down here and exposed. So it's something I can do at least. So the Germans get first swing, and they have no von Manstein there. They only have 5 strength points, and they get a big 2 hits on the 8th Army, which may mean the 8th Army is going to dissolve here. That's the danger, of course. It comes back with 3 strength points rolling and does a hit, which only takes out the infantry. But it's harder for the German-Italian forces without Malta to be able to transfer forces down. Okay. And now I'll go to production for the Allies. They're only going to get 15 points because they've got this penalty on them from the U-boats. I probably want to do something to try to cope. That might work very well to preventing the Italians from being driven off is allow them the coastal defense bonus. As long as they're within a hex of Italy or Italian territory, if they get 6 extra air points to defend them, that's a pretty potent effect compared to you know, what the navies are. And navies are expensive, so risking them against the naval air, and that actually would do a damn good job of protecting the integrity of the system. That's essentially what WIF does, and I think Third Reich, but I don't really remember, A3R at least, where I think both Third Reichs do, where the navies are able to project significant power and protect their own convoys because they have air forces, and you just can't really risk trying to interdict them too much. Brits close things off, buying themselves some infantry and some TAC air in Britain. More stuff to ship down into the Mediterranean if they can get around to it. And then some tech buys, which I'm going to roll for at this point because my infantry and my TAC air are both more expensive than Germany's or Russia's. It doesn't matter. You can actually, you know, you're considered to be opposed to your ally in the sense of getting technology off them. So let me make a roll for the infantry, and I get a success there. That brings it down to $2 each, which is a good price. And the TAC air. I increased some other things as well. That's going to go down as well. I increased my air defense and my ASW. I started building up because I'm worried about this 2-point U-boat. That's going to start causing problems if I don't get my ASW. ASW is hard to get up because nobody else has it and nobody's going to build it, and it's not at a P0 level, which means I can only buy 1 point of technology for it per turn. That's a serious, serious problem that the Brits are going to have to pay. Now, I could have done some Lend-Lease. I've got room to send 4 points of Lend-Lease, but I need the money. You know, my job is not to float the Soviet Union, and like so many World War II games, lending money to the Soviets is a tough call always for the Allies. I know in a game of Whip, I was being given money by the Allies, but quite often I see them cut off the Russians just because, you know, this is a three-way game, right? I've got my own victory conditions here, and that makes it less convincing. But if one of these major, one or two of these capitals falls, we're in trouble. So we got to make sure that that doesn't happen, just because the Soviets will be neutered, and they are the big money sink for the Germans there. I'm at the end of the turn here, going into summer, and we have the minor allies coming in for the Germans here, which I'll take care of. But I didn't build this. Oops. That would be some production that would have been useful. Oh well. But the thing is, I built this stupid one, which probably I shouldn't, because the Allies could take that, and then I have to actually take that back, because that would be in supply, and they can recuperate it. I think I put this in the wrong place. I think I should have had it over here. I'm going to leave it like that, just because opening up Yugoslavia to partisans, it causes problems. You don't want to give the Allies the chance of partisans that they can support. In fact, this one's kind of iffy too, but I did buy that without a question. This one, I think I just made an error in buying the wrong one. But yeah, I'm going to send this one up, and then we'll get full-fledged into Barbarossa with all the minor allies coming in. There aren't a lot of troops. Finland and Romania, I know, produce some. I don't know how much the others do. I think they just join in and give you territory that you can engage through.